has come onto the scene. They're reaching for their crucifixes and whatever. Apparently the magic word tonight was crucifix. Oh, and here are things, in other words, they can't overlook things they disagree with in Ron Paul, like 2 or 3 things. But here's what they can, apparently they can overlook in Mitt Romney. So, for example, TARP. The freaking bailouts, right? The guy supports the bailouts. This is like the key Tea Party issue. That was the thing that got the Tea Party going. Now they're sort of saying, well, you know, hey, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect? Like, that's how you view TARP? So in other words, it's the same policy Obama supported. So once again, it's Wall Street A or Wall Street B. And there are people who think there's something wrong with us because we're not getting on board with Wall Street B. And by the way, I'd say he's more like Wall Street D-, but I'm just using A and B. All right, then what about education? They're all against federal involvement in education. That local schools should be run by local parents. All right. Well, Mitt is a big supporter of No Child Left Behind. He's not going to shut down the education department. He says he's going to make it a whole lot smaller, and you know what that means? It's going to get a whole lot bigger. Right? You know what these phony baloney people mean. Where were Mitt Romney's predictions of the financial crisis? Anybody know of them? Because I'd love to look them up. No, nothing, of course, nothing. Whereas with Ron Paul, you got him on the House floor in 2001 saying the Fed blew up this dot-com bubble, and that burst and wrecked a lot of people. And now they're blowing up a real estate bubble, and that's going to burst and ruin a lot of people as well. He said that in 2001. It happened. It came to fruition in 2008. Who was talking? I mean, who beat him on that? Who was earlier than 2001 on that? Yeah, Paul Krugman in 2005 said, you know, I think the housing is kind of heating up. But in 2001 and 2002, he was saying the Fed should heat up housing. Well, yeah, no wonder he predicted it. He called for it. That's pretty easy. So here you got a guy who is so, I mean, this is, with Ron Paul, you're dealing with a guy who can tell the future. And these people are going, nah, I'd rather have Romney. I want some guy who speaks to me like I'm a 7-year-old. I want a guy who, when he wins in New Hampshire, he reads his speech not from his heart, but from a teleprompter. That's what I want. I want a guy who, if I opened up his head, I think there's at least a 30% chance I'd see circuitry and wiring in that. I want a guy who inspires no one. And here's a friend of mine, well-placed in Washington, sent me this email the other day. I can't tell you who it is, but he's well-placed. And he says, I have a serious, straightforward question. Have you ever seen a Mitt Romney bumper sticker? He says, I never have. This guy literally has done nothing but run for president since 2007. And in all those years, in both states that this guy has lived in, I honestly have never seen a bumper sticker, a T-shirt, or a yard sign for Romney. The only place you see any Romney paraphernalia at all is at staged political events or primary delegate events. Maybe my experience is unique, but I doubt it. And he goes on. Contrast this with ubiquitous Ron Paul shirts, hoodies, bracelets, signs, banners, etc., often homemade and quite creative. And finally he says, Mitt Romney is a terrible politician, a terrible campaigner, and a terrible speaker. He engenders no enthusiasm, loyalty, or interest anywhere. Wow. Well, that's a pretty straightforward view. Whereas not only does Ron Paul inspire people, and look at the crowds, but he inspires them to read political philosophers from the 19th century, and he inspires them to read 1,000-page economic treatises. These kids' own parents can't get them to do this. Their professors can't get them to do this. And this guy, everybody, nothing but hostility toward this guy. He just stands his ground, tells it like it is, and they say, whatever this guy tells me, he wants me to read a 900-page book, done. How about taxes? Never supported a tax increase, right? And never will. Then we got a guy, we got Mitt Romney, who thinks Ben Bernanke and the Federal Reserve are doing a super job. It's just super. I have no complaint with the Fed. So once again, Wall Street A, Wall Street B. Does Obama have any complaint with the Fed? Yep. But and apparently, according there is at least a sliver. I don't want to smear everybody. At least a sliver of the Oklahoma GOP that apparently thinks it's just not that big an issue. Nah, Fed's not a big issue. Sure, it blew up the biggest financial bubble in the history of mankind, but you know what we need it for stability. Oh, it's a foreign policy, like you're all thinking, all right, these are easy, but what about foreign policy, right? Well, I have dealt with this quite a bit. Let's see, where have TomWoods.com/war, I think I've done some stuff on this. But just to make a long story short, there is no conservative in his right mind ever that would have said it is conservative to bring the military to Afghanistan and try to instill, basically Enlightenment 18th century European values into this society. There was nothing conservative about that whatsoever. But moreover, think about this Iraq war that we're all supposed to support, because that helps the U.S., that helps Israel. Does it really? I mean, look at the results of that. I mean, not only, we all know it was based on propaganda. Like a 7-year-old with an internet connection knows that. I mean, don't insult. If the Soviet Union had peddled that propaganda, these people in the GOP would have been screaming bloody murder. But if it's George W. Bush, they sign right on. Every Pentagon press release is like Holy Scripture. I don't believe anything the federal government is telling me, but it's war propaganda. A-okay. Not going to question any of that. But look at the results of it. Now, instead of having a totally contained, as Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice both admitted in quotations that have since fallen down the Orwellian memory hole, Hussein was totally contained, a threat to nobody, a two-bit nobody, a secular dictator. Now they have an Islamic regime whose constitution pledges fidelity of all their laws to the Koran, and it's a Shiite regime friendly with Iran, and that's supposed to be a better outcome. That's great! Now we're much safer. Now you raise that with them and they say, well, who could have predicted that? But there's a certain guy running for president who predicted exactly that. This is exactly what's going to happen with your war. You're going to be $1 trillion poorer. You're going to have all this death and destruction. And now as it turns out, we've got an epidemic of suicide throughout the military, all kinds of casualties. And the result is going to be a worse situation than you started with. And meanwhile, the best they can come up with at Free Republic, so-called, is, well, who could have predicted that? Any conservative worth his salt predicted that is the answer to that question. In a way, it's like, maybe you have the same feeling I do. It's so freaking obvious that Ron Paul is like a statesman for the ages, and he's being put up against these moral and intellectual pygmies like Tim Pawlenty, and people can't see the difference? Like, you wonder, is it me? So, to console you, I want to introduce you to my favorite character in all of world literature, Wonko the Saint. I don't know who that is. You should read Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. How many other dorks are in this room? Come on, identify yourselves. All right, well, book number 4, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. I believe that's the one. He introduces a character named Wonko the Saint. Wonko the Saint stays inside one enclosure. He believes the entire world is a giant insane asylum. And so he says, my little building, my little enclosure here is outside the asylum. People in the rest of the world are inside the asylum. And to some degree, I feel like Wonko the Saint half the time. Like, for example, the fact that it's taken so long for the Federal Reserve to become an issue, when you look at every up and down we've had in the 20th century, you look at the Great Depression, you look at these other fluctuations, you look at the 1990s going into 2000, you look at the housing bubble, and it's always preceded by Federal Reserve credit expansion. The stagflation of the 1970s is always that. I mean, in 1928 or 27 or 28, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York said to a couple of other central bankers in Europe, we're about to give a coup de whiskey to the stock market. Yeah, how'd that turn out? Right? Because eventually the stock market sobers up from that. So its fingerprints are on every one of these business cycles, and yet every time people say, gee, what's causing these? What the heck is causing these ups and downs in the economy? What could be similar about all of them? I just don't know. I mean, are they all starting in July? Is it like a half moon? It's the Fed! I mean, what is the problem? Or how about this? Alan Greenspan, one of the most disastrous Fed chairmen ever. And I mean, that is a coveted prize, right? I mean, a disastrous Fed chairman, it's like a redundancy. But here's a guy, he goes on 60 Minutes, and I don't know if he's